I'm Laura, and this is Tropetrinitytrilogy. Today, I'll be reviewing several short manga stories by Junji Ito. These stories are The Hanging Balloons, The Window Next Door, and The Enigma of Megara Fault. First, let me show off my Wonder Woman costume. Okay, back to the manga. In the Halloween spirit, I decided to reread them again, and now I'm uploading a video that will probably be uploaded after Halloween actually happens because I'm late to everything, but at least I'm consistently late. So the main reason I want to read these stories is I do find his stories genuinely creepy, and I'm not easily scared. I read 2 of these before today, and I read 1 today. So I'm going to be reviewing those. I reread the 2 though, so it'd be fresh in my mind. I want to give a short overall impression I got from these short stories by Junji Ito and what I like about his style. Junji Ito's stories are surreal, sometimes grotesque horror. However, I will say the horror I'm reviewing today isn't particularly grotesque. It can be a bit gross. But I'm not going to be advertising some of the really nasty stuff. So this is more surreal, psychological stuff that I find creepy. The thing I like about his stories is that they have a slow build-up that lead to an inevitable yet shockingly disturbing end. The stories never fully explain everything. Now, this is usually a bad thing in most stories. However, in a short story, specifically horror, it is actually a really good thing. Because personally, I think one of the greatest fears people share is the fear of the unknown. I also really like how original the concepts that the stories are based on are. Because personally, I find established monsters such as vampires, werewolves, and zombies have lost a lot of their scare factor due to the fact we know so much about them. And when you understand how to defeat something, it loses some of its power over you. However, I will say these are very short, scary stories, and the character development is not that great. Generally, his characters are either very average or sometimes they act in ways that don't make sense that kind of take me out of the story. None of these characters I specifically became attached to. And though usually that would really bother me in his story, since the focus of his stories are not character or plot, but the psychological creepy concepts, and I think since these are such short stories, it doesn't bother me as much when the characters are average. It does bother me when they don't act like actual human beings. These characters are more like people you can view the events through. These stories give me a very campfire-side scary story vibe, which I really enjoy. They're not super detailed. I mean, the drawings can get pretty detailed, but the plot is not super detailed. The characters aren't super fleshed out. However, it has a very simplistic, creepy vibe that leaves me thinking about them after I finish them. And they always keep me at the edge of my seat. So now I'm going to review the 3 specific stories I mentioned in order of least favorite to favorite. So my least favorite one, which is actually a fairly popular one, is The Hanging Balloons. The concept of The Hanging Balloons is it takes place in this small town in Japan. At the beginning of the story, a celebrity from the town is found hanging from an electric line as if she tied a noose and hung herself off it. And people are devastated, and eventually they start seeing what they think is a floating head of her. So the story sort of escalates from there. And even though this one has a really unique, interesting premise that drew me in, I actually didn't tell you as much as I knew from the beginning because I think it's better to know less. My issue with it is this story compared to the other ones is very large scale. Like, the scale expands on how many people it affects. It affects a lot of people. Personally, I find things more creepy on a smaller scale. I think when it's more of an internal problem or something that's happening to you but people don't believe you or know about it and you're kind of helpless and on your own, it's more scary. Whereas this story gives me almost like apocalyptic vibe, which can be freaky, but this one I felt like it zoomed out a bit. But this one I kind of felt like since it was so zoomed out, it didn't feel like something that could happen to me or like something that brought in a more relatable fear to myself. the monster in this story was so strange and it was so large scale, it didn't really bring out any fears within myself. I was just like, wow, that sucks, but I'm not really freaked out. It just seems sucky. Like at the beginning, it's very personal to the main character. So the story kind of starts in the future and then it flashes back. It shows you the character alone in her room, freaked out, and then goes back to explain it all. And it's very intimate with her, and even though, again, his characters aren't the most unique, you do get to know her and one other character. So I actually think the main character in this one and the guy who used to date the celebrity were actually really more well developed than the other characters in his other stories. They felt more like individuals. I think the beginning of the story was good. It had a nice slow build up, adding new information every single panel, which is generally how I liked it. At first you don't really know what's happening, but you get more information each time. However, my issue was once the story really escalates, I feel like I become more disconnected to the plot and it kind of skips around more. So it originally builds up fairly slowly with sightings of the head and like adding new information. However, there comes one point where it really goes all chaotic, and then it starts skipping time. So the characters like freaking out, there's action, and then there's like stops and it shows the character in another place and she's like, I don't know how I got here, and I'm like, okay. And then it shows the character in her house and her father acts in a completely unnatural, undisturbed by everything that's happening way that isn't believable and is almost kind of funny. And then her brother and her mother don't really act any way out unhuman. However, they aren't particularly interesting. And then the story kind of has everything happen at once, and then it's like 1 week later, which is when the story originally started. And I was kind of like, I felt like there was like one thing that happened during the week that skipped. I was like, why didn't we get to see this? This seems like something I want to know. Whereas the rest of it I kind of lost me a bit. The ending, though, I will say, was a good punch at the end. However, the whole second half, a bit after the second half, kind of lost me. So my second favorite of the stories was The Window Next Door. Now, I don't own any of these, so this one I actually watched a reading of it on YouTube, and this one had I think part of the reason I liked it so much was this reading had a really creepy voice for the neighbor next door, which is probably partially why I thought it was so creepy. So it takes place, this family moves into a new house, they get to know people, and then the son lives on the house on the second floor, and their neighbor, who no one has really seen, has one window facing his window in the entire house. And she starts talking to him in a really creepy way, trying to get into his window. The story is very simplistic and not as weird as the last one or the next one after this. However, I think due to the fact that it's very almost adult fear in that like some creepy adult lady's trying to get into the son's room, and the way she talks to him, like what she says and how she tries to get in, feels like something that could actually happen. And the fact that his parents don't necessarily believe him, but they do react responsibly. Everyone in this story acts reasonably and realistically. Again, they aren't the most individualized characters, but this one I think actually does characters the best of all the stories. They always feel real. Their reactions make sense. And even though his parents don't necessarily believe him, they do react accordingly. So I think this story has a pretty good build-up. It always felt realistic. I like the pacing in this one. My only thing that kind of knocked it down a bit was I thought this one's ending compared to the last one and the next one was a bit, it kind of lost some of what I originally liked. And then my third and final of his short stories, which is my favorite, is The Enigma of a Megara Fault. So this one is about, there was an earthquake in Japan, they all take place in Japan, and it revealed this fault which has human silhouettes all along it. And the thing about these silhouettes is that some people are finding ones that match them personally, and they're being drawn towards them as if they want to enter them. And warning, if you don't have claustrophobia before this story, you might after. But in all seriousness, if you This story I feel like is more effective if you are uncomfortable by small places. I'm not claustrophobic, but I do find the concept of being in a small space creepy and uncomfortable. So this story really got at what I find most uncomfortable. So the thing that I find creepy about this one, other than small spaces, is the fact that it's very psychological. Whereas the first one, where it's kind of like end of the world, but you're still sane, and the last one where you can literally just move and you're fine. This one, there's really nothing you can do to prevent it because it gets into your head. The threat to the characters is not necessarily coming from the outside, but is coming from within themselves and their own temptations to enter the holes, which is in turn caused by the holes acting upon their minds. And the reason I find this so disturbing is because it's like when you're playing a video game and you have controllable helplessness. You can make your characters struggle, but they can't actually escape. It reminds me in 1984 when the interrogators tell the main character, "We will break you," and he proceeds to resist and try everything in his power, but he is still broken. That's why I find this one so much more uncomfortable. The characters know what's happening, they know what not to do, yet they can't help themselves. So you're trapped sitting there hoping the inevitable won't come, but knowing it will. Also, this one has my favorite ending of all of them. I thought the ending was like, oh my gosh, that's so disturbing. I actually showed my friend reading out loud of this video I watched, which I'll link below, and we watched it together, and she was like, oh my gosh, this is so creepy. I'm like, I know it's creepy. I like it so much. This one, I think the characters act realistic based on the fact that they're kind of going a bit cuckoo because of the weird thing drawing them into it. The characters in the story felt pretty realistic. They were freaked out, obviously, by it. And when they started to psychologically be drawn to things, there were characters who were like, no, oh my gosh, I can't do this. This is freaking me out. So they, even when they were kind of, their minds were going weird and not natural, they still felt like humans who were like, oh crap, what the heck. The creepy part was that it was them doing it, so they couldn't prevent their mind shifting and drawing them into it. The only time I really thought it was kind of was there was this like little romance shoehorned in, and I felt like it was not really necessary because, again, the characters aren't super developed. They're more like just realistic interpretations of how the average person would react. So the romance that was added in, the characters weren't individualized and they didn't like relate to each other enough for me to be like, oh my gosh, that's so cute. I was more like, okay, whatever. I mean, it didn't take away from the story. It's just That's what I thought. The Enigma of Megara Fault was definitely my favorite one. That story creeped me out. Every time I see it, I'm like, Whereas the other ones, they kind of lose a bit of their punch. And I think the reason I find that one the creepiest is the small spaces and the psychological thing that you can't prevent. But yeah, so that was my review of 3 of Junji Ito's short stories and what I generally think of his style overall. So if any of you have any creepy stories you recommend for Halloween, that'd be awesome. And if any of you feel like reading them, it literally takes 13 minutes. You can come back and be like, wow, that was freaky, or oh my, you have terrible taste, you know, whichever one you think's most accurate. Personally, if you're gonna read one, I definitely recommend my favorite one because it's my favorite, obviously. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a happy Halloween. Later!